And when I started this program 2 years ago, my goal was to look for that connection wherever it might be. And sometimes we have been successful connecting a child with someone like a former teacher, a social worker, a counselor, a neighbor. You know, it sometimes is a person who's been involved in that child's life in any number of different ways. But you know, Chris, the real connection, the real power for these children comes from family. And that's what they want most. And I have seen that over and over again with the youth I work with, is that the greatest sense of connection that they're seeking is the one that comes from family. So that's really where we go straight to the heart of in this work, in the Permanent Connections program, is really looking very closely at who are this child's family members. And we realize now that there actually are, for so many of these children, relatives that are there and are available for them, but they just, either they haven't been found or we may not even know about them. Sometimes they are fathers who didn't know they had a child, or who were prevented from having a relationship with their child. They could be biological mothers whose life situations have changed radically in the 10 or 15 years since their child was brought into foster care. And sometimes they're just relatives.
Now, with the miracle of the internet, seems like we can find anybody, classmates and so forth. Do you use technological tools?
Absolutely. I would say that has probably been the single most powerful tool in our ability to now find families, that we now have at our disposal the means to find people that we didn't have 10 years ago. And so what we do is an internet search through a specialized program that's really been developed just for this purpose, for social work professionals in the family finding field. And it's amazing what can happen. I've seen firsthand how many successes have been achieved by simply putting into this program someone's birth date, you know, a social security number, a name, and a report comes back within 24 to 48 hours that might be, I got one today that was 25 pages long, full of aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings. And so we're able to find families so often for these children, families that they never knew they had. And then begins the work of trying to engage those families. And it's not always successful. Sometimes we might, even with names and addresses, if we don't have a phone number, you know, and frequently, of course, these people are separated geographically at some distance. So there are some cases that I've been working on still for over a year, just steadily plugging away trying to find these people. But in other cases, I have found family members sometimes in just a day or two.
Sounds like you lead the life most of us are sitting on the couch watching Cold Case or along that line, and you get all the emotional gratification.
Very exciting. It's very exciting.
So can you tell me, give kind of a generic case maybe, or someone that might be
Sure.
close to you, just to kind of the process, and I want to talk also about how Ventura County can help support this financially, or if there's volunteer things or translation. I think interpreters, we're not always, though I don't think all those 700 children came from English-speaking families necessarily.
Right. Well, I'll give you as an example the case of a 17-year-old boy who was referred to my program. And many, actually, of the young people that come to me are in the Independent Living Program, which is a program that is designed by the Ventura County Human Services Agency to help prepare these youths for emancipation. So this boy, who I'll call George, had been in foster care for a period of 8 years. So since the age of 9, he had been in foster care. And he was looking ahead towards emancipation and going off on his own. And his social worker asked me to take a look at what family members might be out there for him, because he was specifically expressing an interest in finding his father. George remembered his father as a very young boy, but his parents had gotten divorced. His mother had become mentally ill. He had been taken in by his grandparents. He then experienced abuse at the hands of his grandparents, and so he was removed from his grandparents' care and brought into foster care around the age of 11. And his grandparents subsequently had died, so he truly was left all alone. And he was interested in family in general, but his father really specifically. So I sat down with him and I said, George, what do you remember about his father? And he said, not really very much at all, but I do know his name. So his father's name, fortunately, was somewhat unusual. It always helps when you're trying to find someone. And the other thing he knew about his father was that he lived in a Midwestern city. So I thought, and that he worked for Walmart. So I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to find someone in this large Midwestern city that works for Walmart? But nevertheless, I entered the data and sat back and waited for a miracle. And lo and behold, about a day later, I came up with an address. The report came back, and there was a person with that same unusual name with an address in this city. So I immediately got on the phone and called directory assistance and tried to find this man's phone number. And what often happens, especially now in the age of cell phones, is there was no phone listing for him. But I pursued this, and I asked to speak to a supervisor, and actually what she told me, the supervisor at the phone company, was in fact there was a phone for this man, but it was unlisted. And so I explained to her that this was an unusual situation, and I told her it was very urgent. We had a young boy a young man who was looking for his father. I explained everything to her. And she said to me, oh, well then you'll want to talk to the local police. I'm sure they'll help you with this. And I was kind of amazed and a little surprised, but I thought, well, that's fine. And so she gave me the phone number for the local police precinct nearby. And I called the police, and they said, absolutely. They said, we'll send a dispatch out and go and speak to him. And I said, that's great. How long do you think that'll take? And they said, oh, about 20 minutes. So I just was amazed. I hung up the phone, I sat back, I watched the clock, and lo and behold, in about 30 minutes, the phone rings. And it's this man, it's the father of this boy, who this boy has been looking for years and years and years. And he calls me on the phone, and he is sobbing, absolutely
Me too.
sobbing. And he said, how did you find me? And I told him what happened, and he said, I never knew where he was. He said, all these years, he says, I've never stopped thinking about him. He had no idea he was in foster care. He had searched everywhere for him. His ex-wife had prevented him from knowing anything at all about their whereabouts. And he told me not a day had gone by, without his worrying and wondering about where his son was. So one of the first questions he said to me is, when can I see him? Well, of course, I got on the phone. We had some conference times with a social worker. I went out and shared with George what was going on. George was absolutely, over the moon about this. And the next thing we did was get on an airplane. I took George and George's social worker. We flew across the country, and George was able to meet not only his father, but his 3 siblings. He had 2 brothers and a sister he had no idea he had. And he had a grandmother who, incidentally, his grandmother lived out here only about 5 miles from where he was living in his group home. So for years, he'd been that close to his grandmother but didn't know that, and nor did she. So he went back, and he had a huge family reunion with all of these family members. and stayed there for about 4 or 5 days.